Welcome to the Post-Human Podcast.
So today's guest, author and poet, Marc Janssen. So how are you today, sir?
Fine, thank you. Good to see you, Tim.
No, it's good to have you on the show. So you're the first poet I've had on the show. So let's get right into that. What got you into writing poetry?
Well, I've always been a writer, and it was for years I thought I was going to be a novelist. I started so many novels. There's a lot of writers out there that started so many novels, but they didn't finish any of them, and I'm one of those. After I graduated from college, I became a copywriter, and I kind of found this is kind of my speed. I'm a sprinter, not a long distance runner. So, I can write a poem, I pat myself on the back, and then I move on to the next thing.
I mean, I've wrote little bits. But again, I'm not a great writer. I did that before I did podcasting, just like 15,000 word little thing. But I bet if I was to read it back now. So what sort of, how long have you been doing it for? I didn't manage to get any links prior to the show. So I'm just going to have to run with just questions. Sure. Normally I'll have a bunch of research and then some bullet points and whatever, but I'll just do it on the fly. Hopefully the 50 cups of coffee I've had will aid that. So how long have you been writing poetry for?
Right. So a long time. It's one of the things I kind of dabbled with, as a kid and in high school or whatever. I became more serious about it maybe in the last 20 or 30 years. So a long time.
What's some of the main themes? Do you stick to sort of a main genre, or do you just sort of, write as is, or
That's a good question. Because over time, the things that are important to you change.
Yep.
Right. I'm going to be 56 here pretty soon. And the things that I was writing about when I turned 30, not the same things that I'm writing about now.
You don't look 56, I'll add.
I feel 56. In my 30s, I was really morose. I was really kind of depressing and I look at that stuff now and it's kind of like, maybe I can fix some of the stuff up. It's like trying to fix a cave painting, you're like,
right,
what can you do? And the things I talk about now are more kind of like everyday. I try to like root the stuff I write about in everyday life. What is going on in, and find those kind of universal themes that would touch us all in some way or another. And so that's what I'm working on now, as opposed to like being really depressed about stuff or listening to a lot of Depeche Mode or something.
Depeche Mode. Yeah, that's not going to help. It might help the poetry if that was what you was aiming for, but yeah. I don't know. So when you're writing stuff that's more, like you say, more current now, what's sort of your processes for that? Have you got some sort of, when I was doing my writing, I mean, everyone's got their own sort of processes. When I was doing it, weirdly enough, I would sit out in like a greenhouse and I'd sit on my phone, tap away, have a couple of drinks, and then I'd come back in after like an hour and a half. Just because it was the only place I could also smoke, which was, I don't smoke indoors. So, when I'd smoking out there, I'd be like, oh, okay, this is a good idea. And then I'd do a bit of writing, come in and whack it up on the computer. So I'd like sort of do a mild draft and then sort of go, oh, okay, we can fix this here. What's sort of your process?
That's really important, Tim, because it doesn't matter if you're writing or any kind of creative endeavor, right? If you're painting or if you're writing novels or poems or if you're drawing, whatever it might be, you have to kind of find your sweet spot, right? And your sweet spot was out there in the greenhouse. You're out there, you kind of get in the mode, right? You're kind of setting yourself up for a creative endeavor, whatever that might be. right? And so for me personally, the pandemic really screwed me up because I worked in an office,
Right.
and I had my day kind of like planned. And the way it used to work was I'd go in, I got a union job, right? I get 15 minutes in the morning, I get 15 minutes in the afternoon, and I have an hour lunch. And so in the 15 minutes in the morning, I would read. 15 minutes in the afternoon, it was a timed writing. Every day at 3:30, I'd go, and my brain was just like set. This is the way it's going to be, right? At 3:30, you're kind of primed to just do it. And when the pandemic happened, I had to change the process that I have. And it's still kind of changing because it hasn't quite set in the way I would like it. So that it would just be like, because when I was a copywriter, we wrote 1,000 ads in 6 months. It was just like sit and go. You got to go. There's no time to fool around. You just go. And that was the way I was able to write my regular poetry writing too. Is just like it's 3:30. You sit down and you go. And what a great a creative opportunity that was, because my mind was just kind of like set up to do that. There's a great Oregon poet. His name is Kim Stafford. There's a lot of people that do this. He does morning pages, right? So you get up in the morning, and like the first thing you do is you get up and you need to write 3 pages, so that there's no filters, there's no nothing. And some people can. I can't do that. So I'm a morning person, and I can't do that. I need to kind of like get going a little bit. I'm more kind of like an afternoon creative person. And so the idea is you would kind of like, for any kind of creative writing, for any kind of creative endeavor, you have to like find that, I don't want to say it's a magic key, but that mode that allows you, and like you said, you sit out there, you have a cigarette, you kind of thinking, and then you kind of like go on. And for me, I have like some headphones in, I got some music going, something that would like put space in there so that I can, and some music works better than others. Let me tell you, it can't be like something you don't like, or something you're really into. It's got to be, for me, it's got to be something, kind of background, maybe some like new agey something, or maybe some like smooth jazz or something, just to kind of like create that space. And that's just me. Other people, maybe I knew a girl who just loved like death metal. She just loved it, right? And I couldn't listen to that and write anything. It wouldn't work for me. It worked for her. Worked for her, man.
I like all genres of music. I mean, I like pretty much. There isn't a lot that I don't like genre-wise, but there's some. I don't know. I probably have. I mean, I've got, even before a podcast, I'll put on not specific songs, but I've got like a playlist just to, get me pumped up and whatever. But there's occasionally some death metal, but that's for a podcast. It's like, yeah, let's get going. But I guess if you're trying to write,
deep growling voice and the double bass, and it's just like, for me, it's just too busy for me.
If you're trying to write something peaceful, Slayer isn't a good option. Yeah, I get that.
For her, it works great.
So obviously, you started writing, and obviously you was doing copywriting and stuff like that. What really got you into it? What was the real turning point and crucial moment where you said, right, I'm going to do this sort of full time. I'm going to try and make something of it. Was there a crucial key moment?
Okay, so this is a story. So hopefully a minute. I was in Ventura, California, which is a great town. If you've ever visited, it's on the West Coast. It's halfway between Los Angeles and Santa Barbara. Coastal town, nice town. They had this place. It's not in business anymore. It's a little coffee shop. And they would have poetry readings on there on Thursday nights. Every Thursday night, like clockwork. 7:00, they'd have a poetry reading on. Small place, just a shoebox, really. Just a tiny little floor, maybe about 12 by 12. There was a staircase that went up to a little loft there, and then there were people dealing drugs out the back. So it was all kind of, it was, and this place was packed. It was packed. So many people sitting on the stairs, people sitting outside. They had a sign-up sheet. They had a little featured reader. They talked for about 15, 20 minutes or whatever, and then 5 minutes or 3 poems, whichever comes first, and 30, 40 readers. They'd be there until like 11 o'clock at night, right? And they'd start at 7, and it was just great. And so that's where I kind of got my start, was that for poetry, there's it's kind of like 2 aspects, right? One is you can kind of like, you write it and then you can read it on the page or whatever. But there's also kind of like a performance aspect of it. If you go to like a coffee shop, a bar, or whatever.
Slam poetry, that kind of thing as well. That's really performance, isn't it?
Slam poetry is like the extreme version of that. And you go out there and you're like, this is it. And it's kind of like, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
I can get that. I mean,
that's what kind of hooked me on it.
30 people a night, that's a lot. I mean, if you used to go and see a stand-up comedy gig, you're probably not going to get through 30 a night, you know. But obviously, poems are pretty, well, you know, it could be like 2 to 5 minutes, really, couldn't it? I'd imagine that's. But oh man, that's quite a lot. That's a busy night. I'd suspect they'd be making a hell of a lot of cash, even just for a coffee shop.
That, and poets are notoriously cheap and don't have any money.
Well, yeah.
That part of it.
One cup of coffee. How many times have you performed yourself?
Hundreds of times.
What's been some of your most memorable?
I did a number of I was a featured reader a number of times in Ventura. Those were all fun. I organized poetry events in Salem, Oregon, and in the Mid-Valley. I organized the Salem Poetry Festival for a couple of years. That was fun. Most recently, I did, it was called Poetry on the Lawn. We're in the middle of the pandemic. And so we thought, well, in July, we had like an outdoor event so people can like distance and everything. And that was fun. I closed out that particular event. There was another event at the Salem Library where there were a number of poets, and I ended up between 2 Oregon poet laureates. That was nice. Kind of like the book ended by them. So yeah, there's been so many highlights, and it's been great the whole time. And I was nominated for Oregon Poet Laureate. That was fun. That wasn't like an event, but I get published, about once a month, different publications. That's always exciting to have somebody, put your word in their magazine, their journal.
Where'd you get published? Is it just online, or is it just, I mean, I don't know much if like people still buy magazines anymore, if that's still a thing. I don't know if they do. They do. It's like libraries. They're pretty non-existent at the moment. Some of them anyway.
I get published in print journals and online, all over the US, in the UK. I was published in Poetry Salzburg, a publication out of Greece, Canada, one down in Australia. So it's
busy.
all over the place. All over the place. All those are kind of niche, though. You have to.
Yeah, no,
there's a lot of. It's not like this in the newspaper. It's like, oh, there's a poem. so it's kind of.
The last time I bought a newspaper, like an actual physical newspaper. I mean, I read a lot of news online. I don't really like buying papers because it's just, I'm like, I'm just going to throw it in the bin. It's got to be recycled, and where's that recycling go? You don't even really know most of the time. So I tend to just avoid them.
The funny thing, Tim, is that the way that we interact with information has changed.
Oh, yeah.
Because you're younger than me, right? And so I still get the paper like twice a week. I get it on Sunday. I get it on Wednesday. In the U.S. on Wednesday, they put the ads for grocery stores in on Wednesday, and they usually have like a recipe. but because I get the newspaper, it's not only things I'm interested in, because Google has the algorithm of, and YouTube has, it kind of just feeds you the same things that you're used to, or the things that you like, or the things that you're interested in. Whereas if you get the newspaper, it's just like, this is what's going on.
No, that makes sense.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, whenever I do read the news, I won't just go to one site, and I'll check out a lot of different stuff. I tend to go down rabbit holes a lot. So my algorithm's pretty messed up. It's mostly conspiracies and, a whole bunch of stuff that's completely irrelevant to day-to-day life. Stuff that nobody really, stuff where I'm going to go, oh, why don't I need to know that 5 years later? So obviously with poetry, how many have you released? Many books? It's something that I've not had really time to look into.
Sure, yeah. I did a couple of books that I did myself, but mostly I released last year as a book called November Reconsidered. And that was a book that I worked on, basically all the poems in there were new. I worked on them from November 2019 through summer of 2020. And that came out this past September.
How's it doing?
Well, it's kind of relative. How's it doing? A lot of the ways that you market a poetry book is in face-to-face events.
Oh, okay. How come?
Because that seems to be the most effective way a lot of times for poetry, as opposed to, running an ad or it's a little less mainstream. So usually there's like a face-to-face interaction. You give a reading, and then people want to read as a part of the experience. Then you pick up this book and you can read further, that kind of stuff. So I've been doing other things. It's sold okay. Any author would like it to do better. How do it's one of the things, like when you're out, when you're not a New York person, a Los Angeles person, I'm in Oregon, so like, how do you kind of like crack into that? It's a little bit of a mystery and a lot of like experimenting. Yep. For doing this, particularly now. And usually what I would do is I'd go to Portland, I'd go down to Southern Oregon, I'd do a bunch of readings and sell a bunch of books this way, that way. And usually, you'd sell a couple hundred, and then that would be considered successful. I would like to do more than that. I think there's a lot more opportunity for that kind of thing than because usually what you're doing is just selling to other poets. And, because that's who goes to those meetings. That's who goes to those meetings, But coming up with unique ideas, unique marketing ideas.
Yeah.
So I got a YouTube channel and I do some stuff over there, and I do this, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And so over time, I think that it'll sell pretty good. It's just a matter of figuring out how to do it without being in the same room with people.
Yeah. No, it makes sense, because I mean, especially when you're talking about trying to crack a place. I mean, I can't imagine that Oregon's amazing for poetry, like you say. The city I'm in, for stand-up comedy, it's, well, for open mics, there's barely any. If you want to get sort of a show with certain booking places, it's like once every 6 months, and it's like, you're not going to really you ain't going to get anywhere with that. So even then, it's like a tough nut to crack. And then, you have to try and work out ways to get around. It's another reason why I started podcasting, because I was like, this is a bit, well, I was doing it anyway. But then once I found that out, I was like, this is going to be slow. so, it just depends on where you are. If I was in London or, Edinburgh or somewhere like that, you could go do three or four a week. But, once every 6 months is, the contrast is just, in terms of the scale, that's massively like outweighed, Right. So I can completely understand where you're coming from. Have you ever put any of your stuff on like TikTok and done like short poems? Because I'd imagine that would divert a hell of a lot of traffic to where you're going.
It might. And I've thought about it. You know, things like TikTok and Instagram, right? Because both of them are kind of similar in that you can get a big presence. It takes a commitment in time and resources.
Yep.
You know, and I've thought about it, and I'm still kind of in the thinking about it stage. The thinking about it, sometimes I'm thinking about it as kind of like an excuse for not doing it.
Sometimes,
but I am thinking about it.
Sometimes as well, by the time you've thought about it, it's like too late as well. I mean, I've thought about it a few times. I'm like, oh, I'm a bit late to the party. It's like the app Clubhouse. When that first came out, I was going to get on there, and there was like, you need like an invitation and all this crap. I was like, well, I'm not going to do that. And then nowadays, you know, you don't need any of that shit because it was just a ridiculous idea in itself that there was going to be this elite app. It was never going to work. But even now on there, you know, you're going into sort of a room with, you know, 30, 40 people, and that's another channel, I'd imagine. There is like ways to do it, but again, it is a hell of a lot of time and resources, and especially setting it all up.
So if I would, like something a little bit less demanding, probably Instagram. If I was going to do something like that, I think to be successful, I need to have some new content in there fairly regularly.
Yep.
Right. I'm not an Instagram expert. I have an Instagram account. Everything that I hear is, you know, you have to be fairly active on there, something every day, maybe multiple times a day. And, you know, am I willing to do that?
Yeah, I know.
Am I willing to do it?
I have to do it for a couple, and it's like, you know, there's moments where you can waste time as well. You start to post stuff, and then, you know, like you said earlier, the algorithm feeds you stuff that you like. So by the time you finish posting, next thing you've spent half an hour looking at a bunch of bullshit that you're mildly interested in, and then by the end of the half an hour, you're like, what is half of this crap? And then you just turn it off, and then, you know, you go back on later on in the day, it feeds you a new algorithm. It does take up a lot of time, a hell of a lot of time.
Yeah.
So when you you ever thought about writing any books? I mean, you said that you'd started doing that and then moved on to poetry. Have you ever thought about writing sort of a small collection of maybe short stories rather than like a big novel?
Yes. I thought about it a lot. Yeah. I thought about it a lot, but you know, it's where you're going to spend your time and effort. Like any kind of creative endeavor, you know, if you're playing music in a band, if you're, you know, writing songs or whatever, where you're going to spend your time and effort. So for me, you know, I got a full-time job and I do this other thing on the side. So that's kind of like where I'm spending my time and effort. Every once in a while, I get the bug and I kick out some kind of a short story, you know, a real short story. But, you know, they're for my own amusement mostly.
Amusement? Like, what are they? Like comedy-esque things? Or what do you mean by amusement?
I wanted to be the next J.R.R. Tolkien. It would have been great. And I started so many novels, but I also did a couple of short stories, and you know, to kind of like flesh things out and work out different aspects of the history of whatever I was writing, and they're fun, you know.
Yeah, if you're trying to do that, that's going to take 30 years in itself to create a whole universe. I mean, that's something you needed. It's crazy because the people that are most successful like that started when they was ridiculously young. You know, there was already a savant at it before they was even getting published, and Tolkien was one of those. He had
Yes.
like, well, I don't know how many years he was writing for, but probably up until he died. You'd imagine so, which is a
Yes.
whole massive body of work. It's I mean, I'm looking forward to the new Amazon series that they're bringing out. If you've heard much about that,
I
the
saw some commercials for it. Yeah.
what's your thoughts on that? Do you think it's going to ruin the actual film series, or do you think it'll do
Um,
well?
I've heard a couple different things about it, and I'm not going to prejudge. I've just seen a couple of basically the commercial I saw was there was some wood and there was some looked like maybe like something was running on the wood, like maybe it was like gold or some kind of or mercury or something. And so they said, it's coming. I'm like, okay.
Yeah,
It's coming. And so I don't know exactly what it's gonna be about or who's involved or anything like that.
Well, I
So
think they're doing it from a bunch of the short stories because obviously they
mhm,
couldn't get any of the rights to Tolkien's main estate, and I'm
sure.
100% certain that Peter Jackson probably owns. Well, I'm not sure what rights, but probably owns a lot of character rights now. And
Yeah.
I
But you
can't
can
even
go
think
back
if
into
he's doing it.
Silmarillion
Oh
and
yeah,
all those other short stories, those unfinished stories, the stuff that Christopher Tolkien did. So there's all kinds of material out there. You know,
who are some of your favourite authors?
um, I loved reading the Conan
Conan's
stories.
brilliant.
Those
That's
are
really
great.
good. The comics are amazing.
Those are fun. Um, I read when I was in fifth grade or sixth grade. Was a very difficult reader. I didn't read very well, and and I started reading. Let me just kind of contextualize that. I read very slowly, and I could remember all kinds of stuff, but I just had a hard time reading, and I had a hard time spelling. Just spelling was just off the chart bad. Um, and there were two things that really kind of helped me in that. I still read slowly, but I still, but what increased my enjoyment of reading. And one, Marvel comics when I was in fifth, sixth grade, high school, all the way through, loved them. And then the books of J.R.R. Tolkien and the pulp novels from Edgar Rice Burroughs about John Carter on Mars and all that kind of stuff. Those are kind of formula, but they're kind of fun.
Yep.
When I was I think was a freshman in high school, I read The Sword of Shannara, and that is like a monster. That is a monster. And it was like, and so it was difficult because I had this concept of myself as like not too smart. At the same time, I could still run through some of these big tomes. Dune.
Dune's good as well. You ever read the Dark Tower series as well? They're really another bunch of chunky books. If you read the
Dark Tower.
Stephen King.
Stephen King.
Yeah, it's his series, the Dark Tower. I think they made a film. Well, I think they making a series.
Made a film about him.
Yeah, that was Matthew McConaughey was in there. It didn't do too well, apparently. I didn't mind it, but that's a really good book series. But they're just so long, and you really need a hard copy because if you're going to try and read it on like a phone or a Kindle, it's going to take you absolutely forever. Yeah. But I'd highly recommend them if you've not read those.
Yeah. Haven't read them. And the other guy was Robert Jordan.
I don't know who that
Ian
is.
Fleming. Robert Jordan. He picked up after Robert Howard finished his Conan books in the 70s or 80s. Robert Jordan started writing those. He also wrote a couple of 007 James Bond novels.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And he did, a whole bunch of books. Those were fun. Those are good. Those were good books. And so yeah, just all kinds. I was deeply involved in reading all that stuff. I love adventure stories, man.
Fantasy and sci-fi is some of the best stuff as well. It's especially when you're a kid, because it just takes you to a completely different place. You know, it doesn't sort of matter what you're doing in your life. Even if I mean, there's people out there that have had really crap childhoods, and you know they've just been so involved in reading. You know, it's been a big help to their own life, and it's so. I mean, especially with like fantasy stuff. I mean, comics are brilliant. You know, I've been reading them my whole life.
Right.
You know, I've owned quite a few, and unfortunately sold most of them years ago, which was.
Well, you know, and for my daughter's generation, the 20-somethings, that Harry Potter series.
Oh yeah, amazing.
Was brilliant, especially that first book.
Yep.
Because that first book was just kind of like, here's this kind of, you know, Harry is like the everyman. He's this, you know, things don't go right for him. He's kind of a nerd. He's got this brother that beats up on him. And then he turns out to be like the guy. He turns out to be the hero of the whole thing. Oh, wonderful.
I've still got my first
and the same thing with Neville.
That's one of the best character developments of the whole series. Like a really good. That's the thing. I mean, I know she gets a lot of shit, but it's undeniable that it's one of the best. The problem, one of my problems is most of the people that are slandering it now read that book and loved it as a kid. Like I know people personally that have jumped onto the ship, and I'm like, what? You've watched all the films. You're going to watch the latest film. You know, I know it's got very much little to do with Tolkien, but not Tolkien, J.K. Rowling. But you know, it's like, what are you doing? Like, stop jumping on the bandwagon. Formulate your own opinion.
Exactly. And you know what? Just take the book for what they are.
Oh yeah.
You know, and they're pretty good reads, really. They're pretty good reads.
Especially if you're a kid as well. You know, if you're really young, I read them pretty young. You know, and especially when they'd come out, it was good as well, because every time they'd come out, it'd be a bigger volume of, you know, the book. And as a child, that's great, because the more you develop your reading, you know, your reading level, the bigger the book was. So, you know, I can't remember how old I was when the first one came out. But then by the time the whole series had come out, I think I was like just leaving school or something.
Right.
And, you know, the book was like that big. Yeah, so it's like, it's in a way, that was something that people don't quite realise, is that she almost inadvertently, and probably didn't realise, that she was helping people with their reading level for the generations.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. A lot of those kids, they got pulled in from the movie and they loved it and they went and read the book.
Oh, yeah.
So many people.
What's some of your favourite movies?
I was just talking about this today. Okay, some favorite movies. Metropolis.
Oh, see, I haven't seen Metropolis. I haven't seen Metropolis in a while.
Metropolis. Oh my gosh. So many levels. So many layers.
I think it's 1927, I believe.
Something like that. Yeah.
That's
and,
ages.
The other one I was thinking of the other day, because I just saw a quote from him on YouTube, Citizen Kane by Orson Welles.
I haven't seen that in a very long time either. That come up with me the other day. I'm a big fan of Kubrick, and just in some bullshit newsfeed, it was like Kubrick's top 5 favourite films or something that he'd mentioned over the years. And that was one of them. I can't remember what a few of the others were. And I was like, I should really watch that again. So it's funny that you mentioned that, because I'd come across that, I think it was yesterday. It wasn't today, it was yesterday.
Yeah.
It's so bizarre.
And then Star Wars came out when I was in 4th grade. And it was huge. It was huge for us. I lived in a small town. We didn't get it until the next year.
Wow.
We got it when I was in 5th grade. and it had been released and had gone all the way around the planet almost, and then we got it. Oh man, it was such a phenomenon. You know, they talk about this is, you know, it was like way off topic, but whatever. You know, people lining up to see movies and stuff. There was nothing like Star Wars. Oh my gosh, it was crazy that they booked the theater for a month, and it was there in a month, and people were there every single night.
Things like that you just don't see ever again now. Even though the cinemas have just reopened back up, you're never going to see things like that. I mean, I've not really heard of anything lately where people have done that. Maybe for,
you know, maybe like Avengers Endgame or something.
That's what I was just going to say. Maybe that, but even then,
but
I couldn't be on the scale.
when I was in 5th grade, there was this TV show. That came out of the Bay Area that we would watch, like a kid's show. And there was this guy, and he was dressed up in like this spaceman outfit, and they would show these Japanese like science fiction serials. And before the station break and stuff, he would come on and they would play this game with people that would call in or whatever. And the question he always answered, the question he always asked these kids was, how many times did you see Star Wars? And the answer was like, I saw it 10 times. I saw it 30 times. I saw it 15 times. It's like, you know, and each of those was like $3.
Yeah. It's a fortune.
You know, $3 or $3.50. Oh,
I've known people that have gone to see like you said, Endgame, and there was like, yeah, even some of the new Star Wars films, like, yeah, I've seen it three times. I was like, in the cinema? I was like, really? That's like £30.
that's a lot of money.
It's crazy. Like, it's a big thing. I haven't been to the cinema in a long time. It's I don't know. I'm glad it's back up and running again, but since they brought stuff out in your home and you can just rent it, it's like it's easier to do that. So much easier.
In the US, and I don't know about the UK, in the US, they've redone a lot of the interiors of theaters in a number of the chains. So you have like reclining chairs and stuff, like big, it's like these big chairs. The last movie I saw in a theater I saw Death on the Nile, but that was because other people that I was with wanted to go see it. I wanted to see it too, but I saw Dune in the theater.
I haven't seen the new
because
one yet.
I knew it had to be on the big screen, Tim. Yep. Big screen and big sound. Because this was going to be, you know, sandworms, and there's going to be giant rooms and stuff, and I want to have all that. Oh, I love it.
That's the one thing I've not got around to watching yet is Dune. I've seen so many recent films like The Matrix and all the Spider-Man Eternals. If it's come out, I've pretty much saw it. But that's one that's it's kind of eluded me for a while. I'm not the original's so good that I don't want to watch it and be, you know, sort of half let down. There's a few reboots that are like that, especially when they're constantly doing stuff from the 80s, like reviving it all again, and it's not a bad thing, but it's like not everything needs to be set in the 80s. It's
funny with Dune specifically because it's such a big book. It's very difficult. The book spans like 20 years or something like that. I mean, it's a big story that they're trying to tell. And in the 80s, they ran into a problem, which is how do you make this big book into this little... And I really liked the 80s Dune. I really enjoyed it a lot. And I liked the director, and I liked Kyle MacLachlan as Paul.
Yep.
And there were so many great actors in it. Max von Sydow was in it. All these different great, you know, actors, and the way that they presented the characters was so good. Baron Harkonnen and Revan the Beast and all these guys. But the problem was they had to change the plot because they only had 2 hours. And so some people were like lost their minds because they introduced some stuff, and then the director didn't have final cut, and so they put in a bunch of stuff, a bunch of like narration and stuff and stuff. So I really enjoyed this version of Dune. And then if you really want to see something trippy, there's Jodorowsky's Dune, which is a documentary about the version of Dune that they never made.
Oh, I haven't caught that.
I think it's on Netflix or something. Jodorowsky's Dune. It's this guy, Jodorowsky, an experimental filmmaker who wanted to film Dune, and he made a binder with all the scenes and everything, and Mick Jagger was going to be in it, and it was going to be all this
Mick Jagger,
all this stuff. I think Salvador Dali was going to be in. All these people are going to be in. This is from like the 70s, and it never got made. He couldn't get the money.
There's been a few people that have wanted Mick Jagger in films. Like even back in the day, there was one that come up the other day. I was watching a documentary, and they was considering Mick Jagger for a role, and I was like, "What? I can't remember what it was now." I wished I could remember what documentary I was watching. It's a problem. I've got shit on all the time, so it's always a problem. So let's get back to a bit of poetry. Obviously, who's some of your favorite poets?
Oh yeah, good question. So I like kind of like a wide variety of poets in the U.S. There's a number of poets that may or may not be very popular in the UK. Carl Sandburg is one of my favorites. There's a poem that he wrote that they always teach in high school or middle school here in the US called Chicago. It's a poem about Chicago, city of the big shoulders and all this kind of stuff. And so I like Carl Sandburg a lot. Robert Frost is another one. He was both those guys were probably 40s, 30s, 40s, 50s in there. There's a couple of guys that are kind of like more current, but a current poet is probably no one even knows them. Robert Heine.
Strange how like poets back in the day were like rock stars. If you just go back maybe around even like pre-war and stuff like that.
Yeah,
it's kind of weird how there was just a big thing. I mean, it's not like but it's been almost replaced in a way. Like poetry has been replaced by obviously different creative versions of media. I can't remember the last kind of huge poet. Who would you think that would be?
I can give you two names. Jack Kerouac.
I've heard of that,
he would show up on stuff like The Tonight Show.
Yep.
Right? Back in like the 1960s. He'd be on The Tonight Show, and
I forgot that one.
There'd be Steve Allen was the host back then. He played the piano, and Kerouac would do a couple of poems. And, it was kind of a hip thing. And then Allen Ginsberg would be the other one. One of the beat poets out of San Francisco. He did like Howl and stuff. And he would, made his living as a poet. He was an academic, but he made his living as a poet as well. And those would be the two big ones. And you're right. After probably in the mid 70s or something, there's nothing.
It's so strange, isn't it? Like how I don't know, what would you think took it over? Do you think it was something just like the rock star culture? Like going from maybe like Elvis to the Beatles to, the Stones and shit like that?
I should probably say this because I'll get angry notes from the poets. And Maya Angelou passed away a couple years ago, and she was the U.S. poet laureate for a while. I would say that it's just that poetry, and you know what? You can also say this about novelists, because novelists also used to be on TV a lot. You'd see them kind of in the culture a lot, and you don't see them as much anymore, right?
No, that's the same marketing where they do reads and stuff like that. Because I've been to a couple of those myself.
Yeah, like somebody like J.K. Rowling, like we were just talking about, she kind of like broke through that a little bit. Her books sold so much, you almost couldn't ignore her. Stephen King would be another one, right? Who just kind of like, It's just kind of like around, but you don't see like, because their work is more kind of like popular. They're just popular writers, just insanely popular writers. Back in the 50s and 60s, I want to say that you would see some other kind of more literary figures, right? Just kind of in the media. When the media was different then, you had newspapers, you had magazines, and you had TV. And in the US, you had 3 major networks, and you had PBS. But you'd see somebody like William Faulkner, or John Updike, or any number of kind of like these literary figures, just kind of just more available, more coverage, more just kind of like around more. And they wouldn't sell nearly as well as Rowling or Stephen King, but they were just kind of like presented as,
larger than life.
As part of the national discourse, right? As part of the national discourse. You probably had some of that in the UK too, but I'm not, as familiar, with what was going on.
It's weird. I've never really, it's probably just even then, like people like Tolkien and maybe the odd science fiction writer, like Arthur C. Clarke,
right?
People like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, you ever tried slam poetry? I mentioned it earlier, but have you ever just tried it for the fun of it? I mean, over the hundreds of gigs.
Tried it. And I'm not really in a place that there's a lot going on.
Yeah.
So it might be different if I was in Los Angeles or Seattle or one of these larger.
Oregon's not a hot spot for it.
Oregon, not really the hot spot for slam poetry. There's probably some going on in Portland, but I'm not really.
Maybe that's the niche. You could start it. Start hosting it. You never know. Might happen.
Yeah.
But that's the other thing, if you're trying to sometimes find an avenue and there isn't one, you've got to create one, isn't there? You've got to get one from somewhere. Sometimes it's worth going out on a random, a random lead and just going, let's try this. It doesn't work.
That's right. Yeah. I organize readings and poetry events in the Mid-Valley. One of the nice things about the pandemic, if there is that, we had to go to Zoom, which means that, we started a yogurt shop, and then we went to a bar, then we went to a coffee shop, but you had to be there, which was nice. Really, live is better.
Yeah.
With Zoom, though, people can just call in from wherever they are, and so like we don't have to be in the same room, Tim. It would be a plane trip.
Yeah.
If we were
easily.
And so we've had people from, who wouldn't have been able to come to the live event in Zoom. And so if you're going to start something, you're more able to do that because of the not having to worry about the space.
Do you find it more difficult doing it on Zoom rather than live? Or is there no real difference?
Oh, there's a humongous difference, a giant difference between the live event and the Zoom event. The Zoom event can be good, but it's not the same as a live presentation. And so you have to kind of like figure that in a little bit.
Really, I'm imagining you can't really read a room,
You can't read the room. And like if you were trying to do like a comedy event on Zoom, you can't, there's no audience.
Yeah, I know it's tricky.
Interaction there, really. And
I might have one myself to do the end of this month, and I'm debating still. I'm like, it's going to be a hard one. Shall I?
Yeah.
But I'm going to, because it's going to. You've got to test yourself, haven't you? It could go tits up, and if it does, oh, I'll regret it in the next day.
Yeah. Well, and that's the danger of it too, because if you decide to do like a YouTube, right, then it's just kind of there,
Forever.
warts and all, right? And maybe it's good or maybe it stinks. Well, if it's a live event, if you stink, you just stink for 5 minutes and then you're done.
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
It's not
but
set in
if you're on
stone.
YouTube and you stink forever.
It's always good though, just to test it, roll with the punches. It's probably good for a bit of character building, at least.
Yeah.
At least.
Yeah. I think that there's, some people are a little bit technology hesitant. And so for them, going on Zoom was not a thing. We lost a lot of people because of that. And then it's just kind of it's a different kind of a feel. I work from home. I have an office job, so I work from home. And then I'm in meetings all day. And then I have to go, and then I do this poetry event, which is another Zoom event. And so sometimes it's kind of hard to kind of like get into the mood. It's not like, it's the same thing for comedy. It's not like you're going to the club, right? It's a special place that you're going to do this fun thing.
It's also a grind as well, because if you're working from home and like I say, if you're doing like camera work all day and screwing about, then when you're trying to do something for your personal life, it's almost like your work's almost inhibiting it a bit, because you're like,
yes.
I've been doing this all fucking day. I've now got to go on there myself, try and get a bit creative.
Yeah.
It's a bit tedious. Well, it can be tedious. That's all dependent on your frame of mind. So what's sort of some of your next steps? Have you got any big milestones that you want to hit personally?
I got a couple of things that I'm doing. One is I'm recording some YouTube videos at Marc Janssen Poet. And so I'm taking some of the poems from November Reconsidered, the book that I wrote, and I'm just kind of like doing some videos from it, just kind of experimenting. And so that's been interesting and fun. I'm setting up some live events in the Mid Valley to do some poetry in person. That's gonna be fun. We're gonna do some in the next couple of weeks and in the summer. We're gonna do some of those. Sooner or later, I'm gonna have to work on another book, and so that's kind of been weighing on my mind. What am I gonna do about that? So always got irons in the fire. Always got irons in the fire. You have to. This is another kind of creative, deal. Deadlines and have projects that you're working on. Because without deadlines, without projects you're working on, it's very easy to sit there and,
it certainly is.
Watch Netflix.
I took a couple of months off. To be honest, it was probably well needed.
Sure. You got to recharge.
Oh, definitely a good recharge. I intended to just take off, maybe a month and, like start up in January. But, you sit there over the Christmas period and, you have a couple of drinks and then you start up a bit of a bit of a daily binge and you get a bit lazy and you're like, this is, it's good to sit and relax for a bit. And then, you're rolling into February. You're like, oof, this is getting a bit long now. And the next thing, March hits, and you're like, "Oh shit!"
That's right.
I need to pull my finger out my ass and get myself into gear.
That's right.
But it's amazing how easily you can slip into sort of little tar pits and getting that motivation back. Well, getting the motivation back can be easy, but keeping the motivation consistent is the tricky thing.
Yes,
especially with most people. I've realized one thing I saw as well at the start of the pandemic was there was so many podcasts. And there was so many that I listened to that, that weren't mainstream. And lately, now the pandemic's ending, there's so many that are just dropping. And you go, well, and some of them were really, really good shows. You're like, man, kept that consistency up. You know, it's
Yeah.
a shame. It's a big shame. But it was one of them thoughts that I had. I was like, man, some of these podcasts are dropping. I can't do that. I was like, I put too much time and effort into it, hobby or not, wherever it goes.
Mhm.
You know, it's like you can't really just quit now because it's too much effort. You know, far too much. What's your website? Was it markjanssenpoetry.com, did you say?
MarcJanssenPoet.com. Yeah.
Poet.com. I'll have to check that out after.
Mhm.
Are some of your books on Amazon? Where's some of the best places to find them?
Amazon. Yeah. November Reconsidered is the name of the book. My name is hard to spell, so it's MarcJanssen.
Oh, trust me. Out of a lot of my guests, this has been remotely an easy one. There's name-wise, trust me. There's a few where I'm like, how the hell do I pronounce this? It's terrible. So I go for it every single time. I fuck it up most of the time. It's why I asked it's why I asked pre-show. I was like, I've got to at least get this one right. Like, the bad thing was I knew I was right to begin with, but I was like, I'm going. Do you know when you just second guess yourself? I was like, yeah, it's got to be Janssen. But then I was like, yeah, but what if it's Janssen? And I was like, oh shit. That was my thought. Right. I was like, no, it's going to be that, isn't it? And then that's what I went for as well. Again, sometimes don't second guess yourself, people. It's the first instinct's always right. So this has been very fun, man. I don't want to take up too much of your time. It's a little bit late here. Also, I don't want to make too much noise, wake up everybody, and have to reap the consequences.
You bet.
So where can people find you, my friend?
Sure. There's the website, markjanssenpoet.com. There's a Facebook page, markjanssenpoet.com, and there's a YouTube channel, markjanssenpoet.com. And you can find the book on Amazon. So
no, that's absolutely perfect. It's absolutely perfect. Thank you for coming on. And whenever you're getting something, one thing I was going to ask: have you ever read? Obviously on Amazon, people can do like audiobooks. Have you ever done something like that?
Thought about it. I'm thinking, you know, maybe if I do these YouTube videos well enough, I can, you know, get into a place where I can do an audiobook. I've got the voice for it. And I have some radio experience back in my younger years. And so the idea of doing it is, you know, would be nice. How would I present it? How would I, you know, what would be how would I present the audiobook and kind of, you know,
no, okay, yeah.
And yeah, so there's the thoughts out there. I haven't done it yet. It would be easy enough to do, I think, but I'd have to do it myself because, you know, this is it. This is the whole company right here.
That's the worst, is if you write a bunch of characters and then you've got to distinguish the voices between them. Because if I was to do an audiobook, I'd be like, why? Well, if I've listened to one, I'd be like, why has everybody got the same voice? Like, why does Janet sound like a man? What's that all about? Like, or whatever is a bad example, you know. But you get what I mean, people. Well, listen, This has been super fun. I'd love to have you back on again whenever you're releasing stuff, and more than happy to get you back on, promote it. This has been the Posthuman Podcast. I've been your host, Tim Turner. Catch you next time, people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim.
Bye-bye.